In this video, I'm going to explain why realistic literal force feedback in your racing simulator steering wheel is actually unrealistic and really shouldn't be the only option that racing simulator developers shoot for, and that you categorically need unrealistic force feedback in order to be able to drive a racing simulator in a realistic way. Now, before you get angry and start commenting, first of all, subscribe so you can then unsubscribe in your anger, but also watch the entirety of this video, because even if initially you disagree with the title and this introduction, by the end of this video, I don't think you'll be able to disagree with the reasoning and logic of what I am presenting. In order to break this down and give some context, I'll first need to explain how real-world drivers drive cars, how much they use the steering wheel to actually drive the vehicle or feelings through the steering wheel versus how much they use G-forces and other aspects. Then I'm going to break down how people drive simulators and how force feedback is relevant to simulators, and then really double down and explain the limitations of doing realistic force feedback in a racing simulator and why it really isn't that ideal. Make yourselves a cup of tea. In real-world racing and real-world car driving, even go-karts, the bulk of a driver's understanding of the car does not come through the steering wheel. Instead, it comes through their body, or many drivers would refer to it as bum feel. And let's be honest, who doesn't enjoy a good bum feel? So a driver is basically driving a vehicle through G-forces acting on their body during acceleration, braking, cornering, and the rotation of the vehicle, and how those forces apply to the driver's body. So if you are braking, for example, whilst you have grip from the tyres, the car will deaccelerate and you will feel that you'll be pushed into your seatbelts. And if the tyres start to get to the limit and lose braking productivity, well, you won't be deaccelerating as quickly, and so you'll feel less of a deacceleration. If you're going through a corner, you'll be initially, when you've got grip of your tyres, you'll be pushed into the side of your seat as you turn in, as the tyres can hold that grip. When the tyres start to give out and the car starts to slip outwards, you feel that grip give out because the G-force, the G-load on you as a driver will decrease, and you'll feel that directly in accordance to what the tyres are doing. You also can feel rotational forces, and as I say, a lot of it is your bum in the seat. A lot of it will also be like your internal organs pushing against your body. It's a very visceral and connecting feeling, and this is why when you really strap down your harness in a car, you are absolutely connected to the vehicle, and you are connected to the G-forces and G-loading that vehicle is experiencing, which then gives you the ability to drive that car in a similar way to if you were skiing or doing activities that weren't with the vehicle. The vehicle basically is a superhuman extension to your body, which is why I think motorsport is fundamentally such a compelling and addictive activity. Now, obviously, there's also a lot of other components that tell the driver what's going on, and there's also a lot of noise, vibrations and things that aren't actually useful to helping the driver know where the grip is or drive faster. And a good driver learns what to focus on and what to ignore, and it's actually quite surprising how quickly a good driver can actually isolate what's relevant and what isn't relevant. But that basically describes the fundamental process of how a driver is feeling what the car is doing to then be able to balance the car at the limit of grip, using that information to then go faster. Crucially, the steering wheel in a real car often provides surprisingly little information that the driver can use to drive the car faster. Some cars do actually give a lot of information through the steering wheel, And a lot of cars give absolutely nothing through the steering wheel, and there's a big range in between because real life is complicated like that. And it might be worth saying a stupid saying to help people remember that you drive a car through the G-forces, not through the wheel forces. Though you do steer a car with the steering wheel and also with the pedals. But it's the G-forces, not the wheel forces, that basically tell a driver what they should be doing to go faster and to get the most out of the available grip that the tyres can offer. Here's the big problem for sim racers. Without G-forces or seat of the pants forces, the only way to actually feel, i.e. tactilely feel what the vehicle is doing and use those same parts of the brain that are used for balance and interpreting loads and shifts in loads of force, the only way to do that is through force feedback steering wheel, which is where the importance of force feedback comes in. In a racing simulator, force feedback is the most critical information channel for telling the driver what the vehicle is doing. And unlike visual information and audio information and repetition, force feedback allows you to have a range of force that then allows you to preempt what's going to happen, react to stuff in the moment, and crucially do that using the same skills and parts of the brain and interpretation that you use when driving a real car. If you think about it, the range of force that can be pushed through your hand in a steering wheel are directly analogous to the types of loads of force that you can feel on your body. And there's no other consumer device that everybody already happens to have whilst they're playing a driving simulator that can produce this directly analogous information channel such as you can with a force feedback steering wheel. Now, given that many real-world steering wheels have a very limited amount of information coming through them for the driver to understand what the vehicle's doing in a real car, if you simulate that realistically for a simulated race car, the driver of that racing simulator is not going to be able to feel what the vehicle is actually doing. They're not going to know where the grip is. They're not going to know how to actually drive the car faster or where to find the grip to be faster, other than being forced to use visuals, audio, or repetition. You have basically, by making the steering wheel in a simulator have realistic force feedback, removed the key essence, the core, the crux of what it is to actually drive a real car. So the goal of a simulator, if it wants to replicate the experience of actually driving a car, shouldn't be to one-for-one copy the steering feel of a real car. It should be to give the driver the required amount of information, or as much information as possible, to then allow them to drive that simulated car through a similar process to how they would drive a real world car. You might not like it and it might not be convenient, but it's just a fact that unrealistic force feedback is required if you want a realistic driving process on a simulator that cannot do real world G-forces. Now, there's a whole separate conversation that you can have in terms of what should a developer offer, how open should they make force feedback, what are the limits of home force feedback devices, what are the limits of like a budget force feedback wheels and the limits of high-end direct drive wheels. You can go into a massive exploration into haptics that is another conversation which I'll do another video on. My personal view is that, generally speaking, developers can have their own vision. They can also do literal force feedback if they want to, and that should be something to shoot for with a simulator. I'm not completely against that. However, developers should not hold every single sim racer playing their game hostage to what is, at the end of the day, their arbitrary force feedback vision. Developers should expose things where possible, like what you have with Automobilista 2, Project Cars 2, Madness Engine. And it's also worth pointing out that we have examples with the original Assetto Corsa of existing racing simulators that give very detailed force feedback that is not entirely literal. Though, interestingly, in that case, they might have actually been trying to make literal force feedback. So even when developers do try to do literal force feedback, there's limitations in simulation, there's limitations in force feedback, there's limitation in force feedback devices. So even when a developer is trying to do things literally, it still ends up abstract anyway. So I think that kind of lends even more credence to my argument that force feedback should be approached in a more abstract way, and the priority should be on the information and giving players freedom. Anyway, we can do another video on this, but the key takeaway is that real force feedback and this religion of real literal force feedback is really simplistic and utterly misguided. The amount of times I see, often noobs actually, a lot of the esports drivers and real world drivers I know that are very talented, they don't have this view, but a lot of the time I see a lot of noobs come up with this argument. They go, oh, this sim feels just like my road car, or I tracked some God knows what awful car and the sim steering felt exactly the same. It's like, yeah, that's not a good thing. I mean, it's literal, but not necessarily a de facto good thing. I mean, also, you can get a direct drive wheel and just slap on 80% damper, put loads of filter on, so you really can't feel anything from the simulator. And congratulations, you've probably created an incredibly realistically feeling steering wheel for many go-karts and real-world cars. So, how is that good? Anyway, it boggles the mind. I would like to see things move forwards. They probably won't. Doesn't really matter, does it? At the end of the day, that's just life. What does matter is drinking lots of tea, and that's what I'm going to be doing because this video has now ended. Thank you very much for watching this. Till the next one, happy tea drinking, take care, and goodbye.